Imagining the tyrannical gods of the Imperium Pantheon being slain was getting Ortis Fanimo more and more excited. And nervous. He still found it hard to believe that his new ally, Mythal, actually had the power to kill gods, and yet he'd seen it with his own eyes. She was truly the first of the fabled Godqueller bloodline. But Ortis didn't want to just be her tour guide on this new god-slaying venture they were off on. He wanted to be able to help. Though from a distance, perhaps a great distance, where the gods they fought couldn't even see that he was helping in the fight. Luckily, that thought had given him an idea. Ortis and Mythal had set up camp for the night in the woods outside New Athens, despite the fact that his new chaotic friend apparently needed very little sleep to function and was eager to get to their next target. Ortis sat fidgeting against a tree and finally worked up the courage to say, "I think we should start by going after the goddess Mandar first. She's the youngest daughter of the Hindu Sun God Surya and—"
"Sure, sounds good to me,"
Mythal interrupted, hardly listening while swinging her blade in intricate circles, slicing a pattern out of the bark in a tree before her. "Oh, okay, great, but don't you want to know why?" Mythal chuckled. "As long as I'm slaying gods, I'll be satisfied, but it seems you would like me to know why this specific deity is first on our list, so go on then." Ortis nodded. "Right, okay, well, you see, Mandar is currently leading an army for her father in a war against other Pantheon sun god armies. Another army is led by Apollo, the Greek god who claims to have taken control of the sun from Helios, and a third army is led by Sekhmet in the name of her father, the Egyptian sun god Ra. They've been bickering for years over who the true sun god is, and tens of thousands of people have died fighting this war. A war that doesn't really seem like it has any way of ending until the gods leading these armies are, dealt with." "Wonderful, so I kill Maandar, then her father, then the gods leading the other armies, and tell their warriors to scurry on home, or fall by my blade as well. But would targeting Surya first likely not draw Maandar to us? If she is loyal enough to lead an army for her father, she'd likely have words with us over slaying him, and we'll be getting to both of them eventually anyhow." Ortis replied, "Well, actually nobody has seen Surya in decades, but also I think going after Maandar first could be good for both of us, because she's got a weapon that could help us, or help me. I mean, help us by helping me be able to, fight as well, if I took the weapon." Mythal glanced sideways at Ortis. "Ah, still not wanting me to have all the fun. Respectable, as long as you don't get in my way." "Actually, this could be the perfect weapon to make sure I never get in your way. The Suryastra is very much a ranged weapon. See, a bunch of Hindu deities have weapons called astras. They're all supernaturally imbued weapons that, when released by the wielder, can cause massive destruction. Mandar was given the Suryastra from her father before he, disappeared. And if you kill her and take it and give me the weapon, then I can be more than just your guide. If, you're cool with me using the Suryastra." Mythal stopped carving into the tree, revealing a jackal-like face similar to the beast she'd slain earlier that day, Murzawa. She then swung her blade one last time and cut the face she'd carved in half, along with the entire tree. The trunk slid apart and crashed to the ground next to Ortis, as Mythal casually walked over. "So long as you never aim this weapon my way, then I think it's a lovely idea for you to have some fun in our battles. Who knows, I may even need your help at some point. Not all the gods are likely to be as easy to kill as Zomrazalak and her pet were." Ortis nodded excitedly. "Right, yeah, exactly, and of course, I would never aim it at you, I promise." She grinned, grabbed Ortis, and stood him up. "Wonderful, then let's go get you the weapon of a sun god, shall we?" Ortis grinned back. "Yes, amazing, thank you. But tomorrow, right? I do still need sleep." You and your precious sleep. Fine, do it quickly." "That's not exactly how sleep works." Despite his excitement and nerves kicking up a storm in his head, Ortis was able to fall asleep pretty quick. He awoke at the crack of dawn to see that even Mythal had fallen asleep, hugging her blade like a stuffed animal. The second he started standing up, though, her eyes shot open and she leapt up. "Finally ready to go, are we? Come on then." Ortis and Mythal had put all of their things into Mythal's bag, which Ortis then wore. She then tossed him onto her back to run at speed so fast that Ortis had to keep his eyes closed to keep any debris or bugs from piercing into his pupils. He'd only open them occasionally to direct her. Despite the massive distance they needed to cover, they made the journey from New Athens in 2 days, with only occasional breaks. They eventually stopped in the hills a short ways outside the bustling, recently constructed city of Constantinople. The residents of this city had little investment in the War of the Sun Gods, and were very concerned that it was being fought not far from their walls. This just made Ortis even more eager to help end this war. Mythal and Ortis quickly found the army camp they were looking for. Even from a distance in the forested hills nearby, Ortis recognized the flags and markings of Surya and his daughter's army. Ortis was in deep focus, staring down at the camp, suddenly realizing how dangerous it could actually be, taking a weapon from a god. Okay, Mythal, maybe this wasn't my best idea. Coming after a whole army is a lot. I mean, not that you're not insanely tough, but we don't know the full extent of your Godqueller skill set. You didn't even know you were the Godqueller until a few days ago. Maybe I was wrong and we should have started smaller, not with a god that has a whole army around them? Anxiously, he turned his head to see how Mythal was reacting to his hesitation, but Mythal was gone. Ortis looked around, but she was nowhere near him. He then looked back down to the camp and saw the Godqueller boldly marching up to the first row of hundreds of tents, with white steam billowing off her body and her blade. He sprinted down after her as she called out, "Yoo-hoo, could someone help me find Mandar? My blade would have words with her." Dozens of soldiers stepped out of their tents or looked from around them and saw her coming. They quickly snatched swords and Qatar daggers and ran at her. The first soldier to get close punched his dagger right at her neck, but it just sprung off her flesh. "First and only warning, be of use and guide me to Maandar, or..." Before she could finish, another soldier slashed a sword right at her eye. There was no cut, but she did blink a few times afterwards, as if the eye had at least been irritated. "All right, well, if you insist on being my warm-up..." She swung her blade and severed the heads of the 2 soldiers near her, then hit them both with the back of her blade, sending the heads smashing into the faces of another 2 warriors. As another 4 approached her, she stuck her blade into the ground and cracked her knuckles, making a shockwave of white mist burst from around her. She punched one so hard he flew backwards into one of the tents, making it collapse around his body. The next she grabbed and hurled into the air behind her. Ortis was running up out of the forest, and the body nearly hit him as it splatted to the ground. Mythal grabbed the next 2 warriors and hurled them both into the air towards the center of the camp. "Mandar, where are you? The longer you wait, the more of your army I'll slaughter." Ortis was getting closer to Mythal, but saw that dozens more soldiers were pouring out of the camp towards her. She grabbed her blade again, ready to take them all on. But then, Ortis saw a glowing figure raising up out of the camp, with flames swirling around her. A burning arrow burst from the being's grip and shot down at Mythal. It struck and exploded in a blinding light. Ortis closed his eyes, then felt a shockwave hit his body that sent him flying backwards. He rolled across the dirt, but tried to quickly pick himself up, then rub his eyes clear. When his vision started to return, he could see the area around Mythal was scorched, and dozens of Mandar's own warriors were little more than charred corpses. Mythal had been knocked to the ground, but was picking herself up, with her clothes slowly burning away. She looked ahead as a flame-swirling goddess hovered down to the ground at the edge of the camp before her. "Ah, Mandar, I presume? You know, if you wanted me out of my garment, there are much better ways to do that." The deity landed on the ground and drew back her weapon, creating another flaming arrow. "I know not who you are, but you are a great fool to challenge the army of Surya, the sun god." Before Mandar could finish, Mythal sprang towards her in a swirl of smoke and snatched a part of the goddess's flowing robe. She tore it off, kicked the goddess to the ground, and wrapped this cloth around her chest and waist. "Thanks, love. I'm assuming your attire is flameproof, yes? Once I kill you, I may need to take the rest of that ensemble. And your weapon, of course." The goddess hovered back up off the ground. "You are unworthy of the great Suryastra. Forgive me if I don't allow you to decide my worth. I think I'll let my blade decide it." Mythal twisted her wrist and mist swirled around her blade. She leapt up at Mandar and swung, but the goddess dodged aside and smacked Mythal in the back of the head with her weapon. As Mythal's feet met the ground, Mandar released another bolt from Suryastra and it exploded into Mythal's back, sending another shockwave across the field and camp, sending tents flying. Ortis was watching on, unsure of what to do, when suddenly a voice spoke next to him. "Man, this is some pretty cool stuff. Give me some context here, mortal. What am I looking at with this chick you're with?" Ortis stumbled aside and looked up to see a massively muscular 7-foot-tall figure in gold and crimson armor and robes, munching down on a large leg of meat. The being had glowing runes of a god on his body, and Ortis had a guess who it was. Are you Ares, the Greek god of war?
Course I am, kid, keep up. I've been watching this sun god war for months now, and nothing nearly this interesting has happened before you and that gal came on the scene. So, this chick you're with, who is she? She's some kind of Zulu demigod or something?
Ortis was terrified and confused. He'd always heard Ares was the fiercest god of war on the planet, but despite his stature, he didn't seem very intimidating at the moment.
She's, Again with the stammering, kid. You got confidence issues. I mean, I know I just met you, but I can see it. Gonna give you some advice, mortal. I don't know what your relationship is with this chick, but with a warrior that fiery, let me tell you, she's ditching you after a week if you don't catch up halfway to her confidence. Now tell me who she is and say it without a stammer. Come on, practice with Ares, it's for your own good.
Ortis gulped and paused a moment before saying, "She's called Mythal. She's the first of the Godqueller bloodline. She's already killed the daughter of Anubis and Marana, Zamrazalak. And if you hurt me, she'll be coming for you too." Ares laughed excitedly.
No freaking way, kid. That's pretty rad. This is the best thing to happen since I met that demigod out in Jerusalem who could turn water into wine. And Zamrazalak was a real turd in the meat, if you get my meaning, so I'm glad she bit the dirt. A true-to-form Godqueller. This is gonna be fun to watch. Thanks, kid. Keep up the confidence. I'll have my eye on you.
Ares suddenly vanished in a swirl of black smoke. Ortis was half convinced he'd just imagined that whole situation, but before he could think more about it, another burst of light drew his attention back to Mythal and Mandar. Mythal had been hit by Suryastra again, and was panting and holding her ribs. "That really is quite the weapon. It's going to be very useful for my ally Ortis over there." For the first time, Mandar took notice of Ortis, and her eyes burst with flames. "You intend to give a mortal the great Astra of Surya?" She drew back the bow again, this time aimed at Ortis. But before she could fire, Mythal's blade slashed right through the goddess's arms. "Made you look. Not a good idea to take your eyes off an opponent such as myself." The weapon Suryastra dropped to the ground, along with Mandar's arms, which crumbled into white powder as they hit the earth. The goddess looked at her stumps in horror as the white marks spread across her body. Mythal thrust her leg forward and kicked the goddess, and her body burst into pieces. But luckily her flameproof robes and armor remained behind, along with Suryastra. Mythal scooped up the clothing and weapon and casually walked towards Ortis, with a big grin on her face as Mandar's army watched on, unsure of what to do with their leader dead. Mythal tossed the weapon to Ortis, who caught it, but it was so hot he couldn't hold it for long before setting it down. "Well, that's something we'll have to deal with, I suppose. Makes sense mortal flesh can't handle a godly weapon. Perhaps this will help," she said, raising Mandar's garments. "By the way, did I notice you talking to someone?" As they both marched off into the woods away from Mandar's now leaderless army, Ortis explained part of his encounter with Ares, and how he was confused about why the Greek god of war had been so relaxed about a Godqueller existing. "Well, as you said, he is a god of war. Seeing a warrior the likes of which the world has never seen going on a rampage sounds right up his alley. And he is likely arrogant enough to think I won't get to him eventually as well," Mythal said as she rearranged and put on Mandar's flameproof clothing.
"No, I'm actually looking pretty forward to you and I going up against each other, girly,"
a voice said, leaned up against a tree near them. Ares was there again, this time swigging back a massive mug of mead and carrying some kind of gauntlet in his other hand.
"You gotta get a bit more practice in first, though. Took you like, what, 10 minutes to beat Surya's kid? Means you're not tough enough to take on a real boss like me yet, let alone someone like my brother Zeus, who I'm hoping you're gonna get to eventually."
Mythal cocked her blade and got ready to leap at Ares.
"Seriously, gal, cool it for now. We'll get to our fight eventually. Today I'm just here to help."
He tossed the gauntlet he carried to Ortis, who caught it.
"That there should let you use the Suryastra without getting all burnt up. Only covers your arm, but it'll enchant your whole body while you wear it to be fire resistant. Should even let your eyes adjust instantly to the pretty sparkles that weapon casts. I think anyway, I stole it from Hephaestus' storehouse and didn't exactly stop to get a rundown of how it works. Old Hefty's turned into a real jerk himself. Just like Zeus and pretty much everyone I used to call family. The world was a lot simpler when we were the only pantheon that existed.
Ortis replied, "Wow, thank you, Ares. But there was always more than just your pantheon. You gods from different regions just didn't know about each other in the beginning."
Ares gave him a wry grin. Trying to correct a god of war. That confidence is coming in quick, kid. But you're wrong. You just bought the same history Tarsa sold everyone else.
Ortis stepped towards Ares. "Tarsa? The leader of the Imperium Pantheon? What do you mean? What is she?" Black smoke suddenly swirled up around Ares again.
"Some other time, kid. You two have got company."
He vanished, and as soon as he did, Ortis could hear the thundering of massive galloping feet and the crashing of trees. They both looked in the direction of the sound and could just make out a crimson beast thundering through the woods. It finally crashed through the brush before them and revealed its full form. It had a serpent-like body and neck, hooved feet, and a head like a minotaur. Gripping the fur on its back was one of the leaders of the sun god armies, Apollo. He looked down at Ortis, now wearing his new gauntlet and holding Mandar's weapon. "So it is true. I sensed that a false sun god had fallen, but it can't have been to a mortal like you." He then turned and saw Mythal with her usual menacing grin. "What exactly are you?" Before Mythal could respond, another voice spoke from the forest behind her. "She is the Godqueller." Ortis and Mythal turned to see a lion-headed goddess walking up, wielding a blade and with flames sputtering from her mouth. "Word got back to Ra that a granddaughter of his had been slain. My father will be most grateful when I bring you to him in chains." Mythal said, "Did you mean for that to rhyme? Oh, how cute. Apollo and Sekhmet, I presume? Very kind of you both to come right to us. Ortis, time for a literal trial by fire of those new toys of yours." She leapt towards Apollo, but his creature snatched her in its horns and hurled her towards Sekhmet. The goddess caught Mythal, spun her around, and breathed a beam of fire into the Godqueller's face. She stopped and saw that no harm had been done to Mythal. "Oh, that is quite soothing. Would you mind getting the rest of me? Don't worry, my clothing is fireproof now. Got this outfit from the last god I quelled." Sekhmet swung her curved blade, but Mythal raised her own and blocked it, then smashed her head right into Sekhmet's lioness snout. Apollo then leapt off his beast and marched towards Ortis. "Hand me the Suryastra, boy. Only the true sun god should have any right to wield a solar weapon of such caliber. It calls to me even now." Ortis backed up, but Apollo was mere steps away. This weapon's explosions would surely hurt Ortis as much as his foe. Unless, of course, he could trust the help Ares had given him. He had little other choice since Mythal was throwing hands with Sekhmet. He drew back the bow and a flaming arrow appeared. He released it at Apollo's chest. It struck dead on and an explosion sent Ortis flying backwards. His spine smashed into a distant tree and took all the wind out of him. He dropped to his knees and was ready to feel the pain of the burns. But besides the impact, he felt fine. He looked up to see that he'd flown 30 feet away, and Apollo was sent flying back too. The god was picking himself up out of the dirt as he snarled at his beast, who was shaking its head trying to clear its vision from the light. "Fidiarma, retrieve that weapon." The serpent beast ran towards Ortis. He raised the weapon again and fired at the creature's head. Unfortunately, its neck twisted its head away and dodged the bolt, which flew off into the sky. He fired again closer to its chest, but it weaved its body and dodged that shot too. The arrow flew off into the forest and created a distant explosion. Ortis scrambled back trying to get another shot ready, but before the monster reached him, it skidded to a halt and shrieked, seemingly out of nowhere. It whipped its head back around and Ortis saw that it was looking back at Apollo, whose head tumbled off his shoulders to the ground. Mythal's weapon was now stuck in a tree just past Apollo as she'd hurled it at him. Mythal had Sekhmet held up by the hand that she hadn't just used to throw her blade. "Well, look at that. My weapon can still kill a god when not directly in my hand. Wonderful to know." Fidiarma shrieked and galloped towards Mythal, who swung her fist at Sekhmet, just to have the goddess kick herself out of Mythal's grip and backflip to her feet. She then lunged at Mythal and bit her lion teeth into the Godqueller's shoulder. To Ortis's shock, Mythal actually yelled out in pain. She was trying to shake Sekhmet off, but was having no success, and Fidiarma was nearly on her too. Luckily, with the beast based away from him, Ortis reeled back another arrow to fire at its back. He released, and another explosion of fire rocked the forest, now looking more like a scorched clearing. His vision did blur with each shot, but cleared fairly quickly thanks to Ares' upgrade. and he saw that Mythal and Sekhmet had been separated and flown backwards, and that there was a massive hole burnt into the side of the serpent beast. It writhed and shook furiously, collapsing to the ground. Mythal darted across the battlefield and yanked her weapon out of a now overturned and burnt tree. "Careful, Ortis, that came quite close to being aimed at me, which we've discussed is off limits. But I'll look past it since you did free me from the kitten's bite." Sekhmet picked herself up and sneered. "How dare you disrespect a true goddess? You are nothing but an abomination!" Mythal chuckled. "An abomination? I like that. I'd rather be an abomination than a god, though in my eyes the terms might as well be synonymous." Mythal charged towards Sekhmet again and swung her weapon as hard as Ortis had seen. Sekhmet raised her own to block, but Mythal sliced right through it and broke the blade, then cut Sekhmet in half. Sekhmet's furious expression shifted to shock and horror as her body split and withered. "Oh, don't look so distressed, dear. Wherever you're going, this abomination will soon send you plenty of company." The goddess faded away, and Mythal walked through the ashes towards Ortis with a skip in her step. She casually sliced her blade as she moved, cutting off the head of Fidiarma, finally putting it out of its misery. "Would you look at that, Ortis? We got you a new fancy weapon, a gauntlet, and managed to kill 3 gods in one day. At this rate, I can just imagine all the murders we'll have accomplished by the end of this year." Ortis could hardly believe what they'd just done. "This is seriously overwhelming. You're incredible, Mythal. This weapon is incredible. Thank you so much for getting it for me." "Oh, of course. We are partners now, after all. I can't do all the murdering myself. Well, actually, I possibly could, but I believe it will be much more fun with you along." She smacked his arm playfully, and he tried to ignore how much it hurt. He looked down at the weapon in his hands. He'd never felt so incredibly powerful in his life. In fact, he'd never felt powerful at all before meeting Mythal, but then a concerned thought crossed his mind. Before you killed him, Apollo said this weapon called out to him. It might have even called to Sekhmet as the daughter of a sun god. How else could she have found us so quickly? What if this weapon calls out to all sun gods? That means Ra and other gods could probably find us pretty easily if I keep using it. Maybe it's not worth the risk, me having it after all. Mythal laughed. "Are you joking, Ortis? We're hunting gods. If having this weapon brings more gods directly to us, then that just makes it even more of an asset. I say let them come for us. We'll show them exactly what kind of abomination the Godqueller bloodline has produced." For the first time, Ortis gave Mythal the same menacing grin she usually bore. It was finally sinking in that this really was just the beginning of an incredible adventure. There was still one other thing on his mind, though. What had Ares meant about the history Tarsa had sold everyone? Why did Ares think that only his pantheon had existed at some point? Finding out wasn't Ortis's main concern, but it was something that he definitely wanted to learn.
I hope you enjoyed the second episode of Mythal Lethal, and I'm thinking I'll turn this into a 5 or 6 episode limited series, and then obviously there's room for crossovers because this is set in Multiverse Tales. But if you're enjoying this and you haven't checked out my other original series I've got going right now, Vigilance, I highly recommend checking that out as well. And if you are enjoying these more original focused episodes and you think you know other people that might enjoy them, it would be a big help if you would share them with some other people. Honestly, I'm not that concerned about them doing well in the long term, but I am trying to get the momentum going a little bit now. Also, I'd love some suggestions for some deities I could use that don't pop up as much in pop culture. Like, give me some Celtic, Japanese, maybe some more obscure Norse deities. If there's one you think that would be really cool to show up in this story in some way, give me those suggestions in the comments. But besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note. And the thought I want to leave people with today is a bit different than usual. It's actually some writing advice from Ernest Hemingway that I think applies really nicely to any area that you want to be productive in. And what he said is he would stop writing for a day well knowing what was coming next, halfway through a page or even halfway through a sentence, so that when he stepped back into it the next day, he could just immediately get going because he knew what was coming next. That makes it super easy to get back into it and have some momentum just built into the very start of your day. And I'll do that sometimes with drawing as well. Instead of knowing I'm starting a drawing fresh the next day with a totally blank page, sometimes just at the end of my day I'll rough out the pose for the character. It's a fairly quick thing to do, but it means the next day when I jump into it, I can just get going. I don't have to think about the pose. It's one less thing to worry about. And I'm sure that can apply to a whole bunch of different areas of your life as well. I hope that's inspiring. I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Friday, the start of a very special My Singing Monsters Grand Prix.